The scream that tore through the pre-dawn darkness sent ice down Laura Stillwater's spine. But it was the sound of splintering wood that got her out of bed and running toward the barn in nothing but her nightdress and boots. Montana territory stretched endlessly around her small homestead. The year 1878 bringing with it harsh realities she had tried to prepare for but never truly expected to face alone. Her husband had been dead 6 months now, claimed by pneumonia during the brutal winter, leaving her with 40 acres of struggling ranch land, 12 head of cattle, and a determination that burned fiercer than any campfire. She had built this life with Robert, carved it from the wilderness with their own hands, and she would not let it crumble just because death had stolen him away. The barn door hung at an unnatural angle, one hinge completely torn from the frame. Inside, her remaining cattle bellowed in terror, their white eyes rolling as they pressed against the far wall of their pen. Blood streaked across the dirt floor, and Laura's heart lurched when she saw the mutilated carcass of Bessie, her best milk cow, dragged halfway toward the damaged door. Claw marks gouged deep into the wooden posts, marks far too large to belong to any wolf or mountain lion. Bear. The word echoed in her mind with grim certainty. She had seen the tracks around her property over the past week, massive prints that dwarfed her own hand when she measured them. The stories from other homesteaders had filtered through the small community of Goldfield, warnings about a grizzly that had been ranging farther from the mountains than normal, driven by hunger or territorial dispute. Laura had hoped it would pass by, that her meager livestock would not draw its attention. She had been wrong. The sun rose slowly over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful if Laura's hands were not shaking as she surveyed the damage. Bessie was gone, nothing to be done about that now. The barn door could be repaired, though she lacked the proper tools and her carpentry skills were rudimentary at best. The remaining cattle had settled somewhat but remained skittish, their fear a living thing that made the barn feel smaller. Laura returned to the cabin and dressed properly, her mind churning through possibilities. She could sell what remained and move into town, take up work as a seamstress or cook. The thought made her throat tight with unshed tears. This land represented 3 years of backbreaking work, of dreams shared with Robert under star-filled skies, of a future they had planned together. Leaving felt like abandoning him all over again. She could try to hunt the bear herself. Laura was a fair shot with the rifle Robert had taught her to use, but she had never taken down anything larger than a deer. A grizzly was another matter entirely, especially one bold enough to attack livestock so close to human habitation. The bear would return. She knew that with cold certainty. It had found an easy meal and would come back for more. The sound of hoofbeats pulled her from her spiraling thoughts. Laura grabbed the rifle from above the fireplace and stepped onto the porch, squinting against the morning sun at the rider approaching from the direction of the mountains. Even from a distance, she could tell he was not from town. He sat too easily in the saddle, moved with the kind of fluid grace that spoke of years spent in wild places. As he drew closer, Laura's breath caught despite herself. The man was massive, broad shoulders stretching the fabric of his buckskin shirt, arms thick with muscle visible even through the leather. Dark hair fell past his collar, slightly shaggy as though he cut it himself without benefit of a mirror. His face was weathered and tanned, with strong features that might have been carved from granite. A thick beard covered his jaw, and his eyes, when they met hers across the yard, were a striking pale blue that seemed almost otherworldly against his sun-darkened skin. He reined in his horse, a sturdy Appaloosa with intelligent eyes, and touched the brim of his worn hat. "Morning, madam. Name's Marcus Pierce. I heard in town you might be having some trouble out here." His voice was deep and rough, like gravel rolled smooth by a river. Laura found herself gripping the rifle tighter, though not from fear. There was something unsettling about how her pulse quickened at the sight of him, how her awareness seemed to sharpen in his presence. "News travels fast," she said, keeping her voice level. "Bear got one of my cows last night. Tore up the barn door." Marcus swung down from his horse with easy strength, moving with the controlled power of a man completely comfortable in his own body. He stood well over 6 feet, and Laura had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "Mind if I take a look?" She hesitated only a moment before nodding, leading him toward the barn. As they walked, she studied him from the corner of her eye. Everything about Marcus Pierce spoke of the mountains and wild places. His clothing was practical, well worn but carefully maintained. A large knife hung from his belt, and she glimpsed the stock of a rifle in the scabbard on his saddle. This was a man who knew how to survive in harsh country, who had probably faced down dangers she could only imagine. Marcus examined the barn with methodical thoroughness, running his large hands over the claw marks, studying the blood patterns, kneeling to inspect tracks in the dirt. His movements were deliberate and precise, wasting no motion. Laura found herself watching the play of muscles beneath his shirt as he worked, the way his hair fell forward when he bent down. "Big male," he said finally, straightening to his full height. "Probably weighs 800 pounds, maybe more. These marks are fresh from last night, but he has been circling your property for days. See here." He pointed to older tracks she had missed, nearly obscured by her own footprints and those of her cattle. "He has been testing your defenses, learning your routine." A chill ran through Laura that had nothing to do with the morning air. "So he will come back. Tonight, most likely. He has claimed this as his territory, marked it with the kill. Grizzlies can be territorial, especially the big males, and this one knows there is easy food here." "I need to protect my livestock," Laura said, hearing the desperation creeping into her voice despite her best efforts. "This land, these cattle, it is all I have left. My husband and I built this together, and I cannot just let it go." Marcus turned to look at her, really look at her, and Laura felt pinned by the intensity of his gaze. She was suddenly, acutely aware of how she must appear, a woman alone trying to hold together a failing homestead. Widow's weeds traded for practical work clothes that were too large for her slender frame. She straightened her spine, refusing to show weakness even as her world threatened to crumble around her. "I can help," Marcus said. "I have tracked grizzlies before, faced down more than my share. I can deal with this bear, make sure your stock is safe." "I cannot pay much," Laura admitted, the words bitter in her mouth. "Maybe $20 and whatever supplies I can spare." Something flickered across Marcus's face, too quick to identify. "I am not asking for payment, madam. Where I come from, you help your neighbors when they need it." Pride and relief warred in Laura's chest. She wanted to refuse, to insist she could handle this herself, but the rational part of her mind knew that was foolishness. This man was offering her a lifeline, offering to stand between her and the force of nature that threatened everything she had left. Refusing out of pride would be the height of stupidity. "Why?" she asked instead. "You do not know me. Why would you risk your life for a stranger's cattle?" Marcus looked out toward the mountains, his profile sharp against the brightening sky. "I have been living up in those peaks for the better part of 5 years now, trapping and hunting, keeping to myself. Gets lonely sometimes, makes a man forget there is more to life than survival. Heard in town about the widow Stillwater trying to run this place alone after her husband passed. Seemed like maybe I could do some good, be part of a community again instead of just a shadow in the trees." The honesty in his words struck something deep in Laura's chest. She recognized the loneliness he spoke of, had felt it keenly in the months since Robert's death. The isolation of the homestead had seemed romantic when she had a partner to share it with, but alone it pressed down on her like a physical weight. "All right," she said. "I would be grateful for your help, Mr. Pierce." "Marcus," he corrected, and when he smiled, it transformed his stern features entirely. "If I am going to be staying around to deal with this bear, we should probably skip the formalities." "Laura," she replied, and allowed herself a small smile in return. "There is a lean-to behind the cabin you can use for shelter. It is not much, but it is dry. I have slept in worse places. Let me tend to my horse, and then I will get started on repairing that barn door. Bear will be less likely to push through if it is properly reinforced." Laura watched as Marcus led his Appaloosa toward the small corral, speaking to the animal in low, soothing tones. The horse clearly trusted him completely, responding to the lightest touch of his hand. There was something mesmerizing about watching him move, the way he seemed perfectly balanced, perfectly aware of his surroundings at all times. She shook herself and headed back to the cabin. There was work to be done, and she could not afford to stand around mooning over a stranger just because he happened to be built like a Greek statue and had kind eyes. Even if those eyes seemed to see straight through all her carefully maintained defenses. The day passed in a flurry of activity. Marcus worked on the barn door with skill that suggested he had done considerable carpentry in his time. Laura tended to her remaining cattle, checked the chicken coop for eggs, and tried not to watch the mountain man more than was absolutely necessary. She failed at that last task more often than she succeeded. When noon came, she brought out bread and cold venison from her stores. Marcus accepted the food with genuine gratitude, settling on the porch step to eat. Laura found herself sitting beside him, closer than propriety strictly dictated, drawn by something she could not quite name. "How long have you been on your own up in the mountains?" she asked between bites. Marcus chewed thoughtfully before answering. 5 years, like I said. Came out here after the war, needed space and quiet after all that noise and death. The mountains gave me that, gave me peace. But lately I have been thinking maybe I have had enough peace, if that makes sense. Maybe it is time to be around people again. "The war," Laura repeated softly. She had been barely 15 when it ended, remembered the celebration in her hometown back in Ohio when news arrived, remembered the broken men who returned. That must have been terrible. "It was a lifetime ago," Marcus said, though his eyes held shadows that suggested it was not nearly as distant as he pretended. "What about you? What brought you all the way out to Montana territory?" "Adventure," Laura said with a soft laugh. "Or what I thought was adventure when I was 19 and thought I knew everything. I met Robert in Denver, married him 3 weeks later. My parents thought I had lost my mind, marrying a homesteader heading to Montana. Maybe I had a little, but it was a good life for a while. Hard, but good." "You must have loved him very much." "I did." Laura looked out at the land she and Robert had claimed, the cabin they had built log by log, the garden plot she still tended. "We had plans, so many plans. Children, a larger herd, maybe eventually a real house instead of this cabin. Then winter came early and hard and he caught sick, and suddenly all those plans meant nothing." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. "You have done well to keep this place running on your own. That takes strength. Some days I am not sure I am strong enough." "You are." He said it with such certainty that Laura found herself believing him, at least for the moment. "You are still here, still fighting. That is strength." Their eyes met, and Laura felt something shift between them, some understanding that went beyond words. This This stranger who had appeared from the mountains like an answer to a prayer she had not known she was praying, somehow understood her in a way no one else had since Robert died. The realization was both comforting and terrifying. The afternoon wore on. Marcus finished reinforcing the barn door and moved on to checking the fences, finding and repairing weak points that Laura had not noticed. She worked alongside him when she could, impressed by his competence and the easy way he explained what he was doing so she could maintain it herself later. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, the mood shifted. Marcus checked his rifle, loaded it with practiced efficiency, and positioned himself with a clear view of the barn and cattle pen. Laura joined him, her own rifle in hand. "You should stay inside," Marcus said. "If the bear comes, it could get dangerous." "This is my land," Laura replied firmly. "My livestock, my responsibility. I am staying." For a moment she thought he would argue, but then he nodded. "All right, but you follow my lead, understand? Grizzlies are unpredictable, and a bear this size could kill us both if we are not careful." They settled in to wait as darkness fell over the prairie. The cattle, sensing something wrong, huddled together nervously. Laura found herself acutely aware of Marcus beside her, the solid warmth of his presence, the way he seemed to radiate calm competence even in the face of potential danger. Hours passed. The moon rose, 3/4 full, casting silver light across the landscape. Laura's eyes grew heavy despite her best efforts, her body exhausted from the sleepless night before and the day's hard work. She jerked awake when Marcus's hand touched her shoulder, his fingers warm even through the fabric of her dress. "There," he breathed, barely louder than the wind. Laura followed his gaze and felt her blood turn to ice. The bear emerged from the shadows like something from a nightmare, massive beyond anything she had imagined. Its shoulders stood nearly as tall as a man, and in the moonlight, she could see the powerful muscles rippling beneath its dark fur. The grizzly moved with surprising silence for something so large, heading directly toward the reinforced barn door. Marcus raised his rifle slowly, taking careful aim. Laura held her breath, afraid to move, afraid to even blink. The bear paused at the barn, testing the new door with one massive paw. The wood held, and the animal huffed in what sounded like frustration. Then it turned, and Laura realized with dawning horror that it was looking directly at them. Marcus stood, stepping slightly in front of Laura in a protective gesture that would have annoyed her under other circumstances, but now just made her grateful. The bear rose on its hind legs, reaching a terrifying height, and roared. The sound was primal, ancient, full of rage and power that made Laura's knees weak. "Easy," Marcus said, and it took Laura a moment to realize he was speaking to the bear, not to her. His voice was calm, authoritative, carrying across the yard like he was addressing a misbehaving dog rather than hundreds of pounds of predator. "This is not your territory. These cattle are not your food. You need to move on." The bear dropped to all fours, swaying its massive head back and forth. It took a step toward them, then another. Laura's finger found the trigger of her rifle, but Marcus put a hand on the barrel, pushing it gently down. "Not yet," he murmured. "Trust me." Everything in Laura's survival instincts screamed at her to shoot, to run, to do something other than stand there while a grizzly bear advanced on them. But something in Marcus's voice, in the absolute certainty of his bearing, made her wait. Marcus took a step forward, placing himself fully between Laura and the bear. His shoulders squared, his spine straight, and he seemed to grow larger somehow, more imposing. When he spoke again, his voice dropped to a deep rumble that Laura felt as much as heard. "I have lived in your mountains for 5 years. I have walked your trails and hunted your valleys, and I have always given you respect. I am giving you respect now by warning you instead of just shooting you dead. But this land, this homestead, these cattle, they are protected. You cannot have them. If you come back here, if you threaten this place again, I will not be so generous. Do you understand me?" The bear stopped, perhaps 15 feet away. Laura could smell it now, a wild musk that spoke of ancient forests and untamed places. For a long, breathless moment, bear and man stared at each other, and Laura had the strange sense that she was witnessing something primal, a contest of wills older than civilization. Then Marcus raised his rifle and fired a shot into the air. The crack of gunfire shattered the night, and the bear flinched, dropping low. Marcus fired again, this time into the ground near the bear's feet, and bellowed, a sound that came from deep in his chest and rivaled the grizzly's own roar in its intensity. The bear turned and ran. Laura could hardly believe it. The massive grizzly that had killed her cow, that had threatened her entire livelihood, retreated into the darkness like a scolded child. She stood frozen, rifle hanging forgotten in her hands, as Marcus lowered his weapon and watched the shadows where the bear had disappeared. "It will not come back," he said quietly. "It will find easier hunting elsewhere, somewhere without a rival claiming the territory." "You faced down a grizzly bear," Laura said, her voice shaking. "You just stood there and faced it down." Marcus turned to look at her, and in the moonlight his eyes seemed to glow. "I told you I have dealt with bears before. Sometimes they just need to be reminded that humans are not prey. You could have been killed, we both could have been killed, but we were not." He reached out and gently took her rifle, checking the safety before leaning it against the porch rail alongside his own. "You are safe, Laura. Your cattle are safe. Everything you have built here is safe." The emotions Laura had been holding in check for months, maybe longer, suddenly crashed over her like a wave. The fear, the loneliness, the desperate fight to keep her head above water, it all came pouring out. She found herself sobbing, great heaving cries that shook her entire body, and then somehow Marcus's arms were around her, pulling her against his broad chest, one large hand cradling the back of her head. "It is all right," he murmured into her hair. "Let it out. You have been strong for so long. It is all right to let go." Laura clung to him, fists gripping the fabric of his shirt, and let herself cry in a way she had not allowed since the day they buried Robert. Marcus held her through it all, steady as a mountain, his presence an anchor in the storm of her grief. When the tears finally subsided, Laura became aware of how tightly she was holding him, how her face was pressed against his chest, how she could feel the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. She pulled back slowly, embarrassed, but Marcus kept his arms loosely around her, not letting her retreat entirely. "I am sorry," she said, her voice rough. "I did not mean to fall apart like that. You have nothing to apologize for. You have been through more than most people could handle, and you have done it alone. That would break anyone." Laura looked up at him, this man who had appeared in her life like Providence, who had faced down a grizzly bear to protect what she and Robert had built. In the moonlight, his features were softened, his eyes warm with understanding and something else, something that made her breath catch. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for helping me, for saving my cattle, for not thinking I am weak. I could never think you are weak." Marcus's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb gently wiping away the last traces of tears. "You are one of the strongest people I have ever met." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Laura knew she should step back, should maintain the proper distance between a widow and a strange man, but she did not want to. For the first time in 6 months, she felt something other than grief and exhaustion. She felt alive. Marcus seemed to be waging his own internal battle, his jaw tight, his hand trembling slightly against her skin. Then he stepped back, breaking the contact, and Laura felt the loss of his warmth like a physical ache. "You should get some rest," he said, his voice rougher than before. "It has been a long day." Laura nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She retrieved her rifle and headed toward the cabin, pausing at the door to look back. Marcus stood where she had left him, looking out into the darkness, a solitary figure against the vast Montana sky. Inside, Laura found sleep impossible despite her exhaustion. She kept seeing Marcus standing between her and the bear, kept feeling the strength of his arms around her, kept remembering the way he had looked at her in the moonlight. It was too soon, she told herself. Robert had only been gone 6 months. Allowing herself to feel anything for another man was a betrayal of his memory. But another part of her, growing stronger with each passing moment, whispered that Robert would want her to be happy, would want her to have someone to share the burden of the homestead. That part of her insisted that what she felt for Marcus was not a betrayal but a blessing, an unexpected gift in the midst of her struggle. Morning came too soon and not soon enough. Laura rose early and prepared breakfast, making extra for Marcus. She found him already awake, checking on the cattle and inspecting the ground around the barn for any signs that the bear had returned. Her heart lifted at the sight of him, and she forced herself to examine that feeling honestly. She was attracted to Marcus Pierce. More than attracted. In the space of a single day, he had become important to her in a way that should have taken weeks or months. It was irrational, impractical, and she could not seem to stop it. They ate breakfast together on the porch as the sun painted the prairie gold. Marcus seemed quieter than the day before, and Laura wondered if he was regretting his decision to stay to help her. The thought made her stomach twist with anxiety. "The bear is gone," Marcus said finally. "I checked the tracks this morning. It headed back toward the high country. You should be safe now." "That is good news," Laura said, trying to ignore the way her heart sank. Of course Marcus would leave now. He had done what he came to do. There was no reason for him to stay. "I should probably head out soon," Marcus continued, confirming her fears. "I have traps to check, and I have been away from my camp longer than I planned." "Of course." Laura kept her voice neutral, proud of herself for not showing the disappointment that threatened to overwhelm her. "Thank you again for everything." "I truly do not know what I would have done without your help." Marcus set down his coffee cup and turned to face her fully. "Laura, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." The seriousness in his tone made her nervous. "All right." "Last night when I held you when we were standing there after the bear left, did you feel it? What was between us?" Heat flooded Laura's cheeks, but she held his gaze. "Yes. I have been alone for a long time," Marcus said slowly, as though choosing each word with care. "Thought I wanted it that way. Thought I was better off in the mountains without anyone to worry about or care for. Then I met you, and everything I thought I knew got turned on its head. One day, Laura. It has been one day, and I cannot stand the thought of riding away and never seeing you again." Laura's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "I lost my husband 6 months ago. I should still be in mourning. I should not be feeling what I am feeling for you. But I am, and I do not know what to do about it." "What are you feeling?" Marcus asked softly. "Like maybe I am not alone anymore. Like maybe there is a reason to hope for something more than just survival." Laura took a shaky breath. "Like I want you to stay." The smile that spread across Marcus's face was like sunrise, brilliant and warming. "I was hoping you would say that." "Laura, I know it is fast, maybe too fast, but I would like to stay, help you with the homestead, get to know you properly, if you will have me." "Yes," Laura said, the word coming out before she even fully processed it. "Yes, I would like that very much." Marcus reached out and took her hand, his grip strong and calloused and perfect. They sat together in the morning light, hands clasped, and Laura felt something shift in her chest, like a door opening onto possibilities she had thought lost forever. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt both new and ancient. Marcus proved himself invaluable around the homestead, his strength and skill making short work of repairs that would have taken Laura weeks to complete. He fixed the barn properly, reinforced the fences, and helped her expand the garden plot. In the evenings, they would sit together and talk, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Laura learned that Marcus had grown up in Kentucky, the youngest of 5 brothers, and had lost most of his family to the war. He spoke little of the fighting itself, but she could see the shadows it had left on him, the way certain sounds made him tense, the nightmares that sometimes woke him in the small hours. Marcus learned that Laura had always been stubborn and independent, traits that had driven her parents to distraction but served her well on the frontier. She told him about meeting Robert, about the whirlwind courtship and the hard early years of establishing the homestead. She told him about the dreams they had shared and the grief of watching those dreams die along with the man she had loved. "You think he would approve?" Marcus asked one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "Of me being here, of us?" Laura considered the question seriously. "Yes," she said finally. "Robert was practical above all else. He would want me to be safe, to have help with the homestead, to not be alone, and he would want me to be happy. I think you give me all of those things." "I want to make you happy," Marcus said, turning to look at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I want to build a life here with you if you will let me. I know it is soon, I know people will talk, but Laura, I have never been surer of anything in my life. You are what I have been searching for, even when I did not know I was searching." "I feel the same way," Laura admitted. "It terrifies me how much I feel for you, how quickly this has all happened. But I am tired of being afraid, tired of just surviving. I want to live again, Marcus. I want to build something new with you." Marcus cupped her face in his large hands, his touch gentle despite his strength. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," Laura whispered, and then his lips were on hers, warm and firm and perfect. The kiss started soft, almost tentative, but deepened as Laura reached up to thread her fingers through his hair, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Laura Stillwater," he said. "I know it is crazy to say it so soon, but it is true." "I love you too," Laura replied, and felt the truth of it sing through her bones. "Stay with me, Marcus, not just for a few days or weeks. Stay and make this place ours. There is nowhere else I would rather be." As summer deepened into fall, Marcus made good on his promise. He moved his few possessions down from his mountain camp, integrating his life with Laura's in ways that felt natural and right. Together they tended the cattle, harvested the garden, and prepared for the winter that would inevitably come. Marcus proved to be an excellent hunter, keeping them supplied with fresh meat and trading surplus in town for supplies they needed. Laura introduced him to the handful of neighbors scattered across the valley, watched as he slowly became part of the community he had avoided for so long. People talked, as Laura had known they would, about the widow who had taken up with a mountain man so soon after her husband's death. But when they saw how Marcus looked at her, how he treated her with unfailing respect and devotion, most of the gossip faded away. 3 months after Marcus had first ridden onto her property, Laura woke to find him gone from the cabin they now shared. Panic fluttered in her chest until she saw the note on the table, his careful handwriting promising he would return soon. She forced herself to trust him, to go about her morning chores, though her eyes kept straying toward the mountains. He returned just after noon, riding hard, and Laura's heart leaped at the sight of him. Marcus swung down from his horse and strode toward her with purpose, his expression serious. When he reached her, he dropped to one knee, pulling a small box from his pocket. "I rode into town this morning to see the jeweler," he said. "Laura Stillwater, you have given me more in 3 months than I found in 5 years alone in the mountains. You have given me purpose, companionship, love. You have given me a home and a future. I know your heart has been broken, that you have already stood before God and promised yourself to another man. But I am asking you to take that chance again, to bind your life to mine, to let me be your husband and your partner in all things. Will you marry me?" The ring in the box was simple, a silver band with a small sapphire that matched the Montana sky. Laura felt tears streaming down her face as she nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Marcus slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, sweeping her into his arms and spinning her around, both of them laughing like children. They were married a month later in the small church in Goldfield, with half the town in attendance. Laura wore a new dress of deep blue that Marcus had insisted on buying for her, and Marcus wore clothes that actually fit his massive frame properly, ordered special from the general store. As they spoke their vows, Laura felt Robert's memory settle into a peaceful corner of her heart, making room for this new love that burned so bright. The first winter they faced together was harsh, but they weathered it side by side. The cattle survived, and in spring, Marcus helped Laura expand the herd with calves purchased from a neighboring ranch. The homestead began to truly thrive under their combined efforts, growing from a struggling widow's desperate attempt at survival into a prosperous operation. Laura discovered she was pregnant in late spring of their second year together. Marcus's reaction was one of pure joy mixed with terror, his large hands hovering over her still flat stomach as though afraid to touch her. She laughed at his concern, assuring him that she was healthy and strong, that women had been having babies since the dawn of time. "But you are not just any woman," Marcus protested. "You are my woman, my wife, the most important person in my world. The thought of anything happening to you terrifies me." "Nothing is going to happen to me," Laura said firmly. "We are going to have a beautiful baby, and you are going to be an amazing father." When labor came in early winter, Marcus proved both better and worse than Laura had anticipated. He followed the midwife's instructions perfectly, brought water and clean cloths without being asked, and held Laura's hand through the contractions. He also turned nearly white when her pain intensified, looking as though he might faint at one point. "You faced down a grizzly bear without flinching," Laura gasped between contractions. "Do not you dare pass out on me now." "The bear was easier," Marcus said honestly, but he stayed upright and stayed with her, supporting her through the long hours until finally, a baby's cry filled the cabin. "It is a boy," the midwife announced, placing the squalling infant on Laura's chest. "A big, healthy boy." Laura looked down at her son, at his red, angry face and tiny fists, and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. Marcus leaned over them both, his expression one of wonder as he gently touched the baby's dark hair. "He is perfect," Marcus whispered. "You are perfect." "Thank you, Laura. Thank you for this, for him, for everything." They named him Matthew Robert Pierce, honoring both his father's name and the man who had come before. As Laura watched Marcus hold their son with infinite gentleness, his large hands cradling the baby like he was made of glass, she thought about how far they had both come. From loneliness and grief to love and family, from mere survival to building something lasting and beautiful. Matthew grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's blue eyes and his mother's stubborn determination. Laura became pregnant again when Matthew was 2, and this time, Marcus was only slightly less terrified. Their daughter, Lily Ruth, was born on a warm summer evening, her arrival much quicker than her brother's. The homestead continued to prosper. Marcus and Laura expanded their holdings, purchasing adjacent land when a neighboring family decided to move back east. They built a proper house, larger and more comfortable than the original cabin, though they kept the old structure for storage and sentiment. The cattle herd grew, and Marcus proved to have a talent for breeding quality stock that became sought after throughout the territory. Years passed in a blur of seasons, of hard work and simple joys, of watching their children grow and their love deepen. Matthew inherited his father's size and strength, while Lily had her mother's quick mind and Laura's talent for managing the ranch's finances. They were good children, respectful and hardworking, and Laura knew she and Marcus were blessed. On their 10th anniversary, Marcus took Laura up into the mountains, to a high meadow carpeted with wildflowers. They left the children with a trusted neighbor and spent 2 days alone, just the two of them, remembering what it had been like in those early days of discovery and passion. "You ever regret it?" Laura asked as they lay together under the stars, wrapped in blankets against the mountain chill. "Giving up your solitary life in the mountains, taking on a ready-made homestead and a widow with more problems than solutions?" "Never," Marcus said without hesitation. "Not for a single moment. Laura, before I met you, I was alive, but I was not living. I was surviving, going through the motions, but there was no purpose to any of it. You gave me purpose. You gave me a reason to get up in the morning beyond just seeing another sunset. You gave me a family, a home, a future. How could I ever regret any of that?" "I love you," Laura said, the words still carrying the same weight they had the first time she spoke them. "I loved Robert and I will always honor his memory, but what we have, Marcus, it is something different, something I never expected to find. I love you too. More with each passing day, if that is even possible." They made love under the stars, their passion as strong as it had been in the beginning, and Laura marveled at how this man could still make her feel cherished and desired after a decade together. In the morning, they rode back down to the homestead, to their children and their responsibilities, but carrying with them the renewed certainty of their bond. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, cattle lost to illness and crops damaged by hail. Matthew broke his arm falling from a tree when he was 8, and Lily came down with scarlet fever at 10, giving Laura and Marcus the worst week of their lives, until she turned the corner toward recovery. The world beyond their homestead continued to change, Montana territory moving toward statehood, the frontier slowly being tamed. But through it all, Laura and Marcus faced each challenge together, their partnership growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. Marcus taught Matthew how to track and hunt, how to read the land and respect the wild creatures that lived there. Laura taught Lily how to keep accounts and manage a household, how to stand strong in a world that often underestimated women. When Matthew was 16, he asked his father about the story of how his parents met. Marcus and Laura exchanged glances across the dinner table, and then Marcus began to tell the tale with Laura adding her own perspective. "A bear threatened our livestock," Marcus said. "Your mother's livestock back before we were married. I faced it down to protect what she had built, what she and Robert had created together. But the truth is, facing that bear was easy compared to what came after." "What came after?" Matthew asked, leaning forward with interest. "Admitting I had fallen in love with your mother," Marcus said. "Letting myself hope that she might feel the same way. Opening myself up to the possibility of rejection, of loss, of all the pain that comes with loving someone." The bear could have killed me, sure, but your mother, she could have destroyed me in ways that Grizzly never could. But I did not destroy you, Laura said softly, reaching across the table to take Marcus's hand. I loved you back. You did, Marcus agreed. Best decision I ever made, staying here, telling you how I felt. Everything good in my life stems from that choice. Matthew looked between his parents, seeing the love that still burned bright between them after so many years. Lily, at 14 and already showing signs of the beauty she would become, watched with the romantic heart of a young girl. I want what you have, Lily said. When I grow up, I want to find someone who looks at me the way Papa looks at you, Mama. You will, Laura assured her. And when you do not let fear stop you from reaching for it. Love is always a risk, but it is a risk worth taking. Time continued its relentless march. Matthew grew into a man every bit as large and strong as his father, with the same quiet competence and steady nature. Lily blossomed into a beautiful young woman with her mother's intelligence and her father's kind heart. Both children eventually found partners of their own, Matthew marrying a rancher's daughter from a neighboring county, Lily falling for a school teacher who came west to educate the growing community. Laura and Marcus aged together gracefully, their bodies showing the wear of hard work and hard living, but their love never diminishing. They became grandparents, then great-grandparents, watching their legacy spread across the Montana landscape. The homestead that Laura had once struggled to maintain alone became the foundation of a ranching operation that supported multiple families. On a warm summer evening in 1918, 40 years after Marcus had first ridden onto Laura's property to help with a bear problem, they sat together on the porch of the house they had built. Both were in their 60s now, their hair shot through with silver, their hands gnarled from decades of labor. But when Marcus looked at Laura, he still saw the determined widow who had stolen his heart, and when Laura looked at Marcus, she still saw the mountain man who had saved more than just her livestock. You remember, Laura said, the night you faced down that grizzly, how could I forget? Marcus replied, it was the night I knew I could not leave you, the night everything changed. I was so scared, Laura admitted. Not just of the bear, though that was terrifying. I was scared of what I was feeling for you, scared of betraying Robert's memory, scared of opening my heart again. It had only been 6 months since I lost him, Marcus. 6 months, and there I was, falling in love with another man. Robert would have understood, Marcus said. From everything you have told me about him, he would have wanted you to be happy, to have someone to share your life with. I know that now. I think I knew it then too, but I needed time to accept it. You gave me that time, Marcus. You gave me space to grieve while also giving me a reason to hope for the future. You have given me 40 years of happiness, of partnership, of love. We have built something beautiful together. We have, Marcus agreed. Not just this ranch, not just our family, but a life. A real life, full and rich and worth living. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the mountains Marcus had once called home. Their children and grandchildren were scattered across the property, the sounds of their laughter and conversation drifting on the evening breeze. The cattle lowed in the distance, generations removed from the herd that Grizzly had threatened so long ago. I love you, Laura Pierce, Marcus said, using the name she had carried for 40 years. From the moment I saw you standing on this porch with your rifle, trying to be brave when you were terrified, I loved you, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Laura replied. My mountain man, my protector, my partner, my love. Thank you for staying, Marcus. Thank you for choosing me, for choosing us, for choosing this life. There was never any other choice, Marcus said. You are my choice, always and forever. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Laura leaned her head on Marcus's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. They had weathered storms both literal and metaphorical, had faced down threats to their livestock and their livelihood, had built an empire from determination and love. The bear that had brought them together was long gone, just another story to tell the grandchildren, but the legacy of that night lived on in everything they had created. Their story had begun with a threat and a stranger's offer of help, but it had grown into something neither of them could have imagined. From widow and mountain man to husband and wife, from a struggling homestead to a thriving ranch, from loneliness to a love that had lasted decades and would echo through generations. As they sat together in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the land they loved and the family they had built, Laura and Marcus knew that they had found something precious and rare. They had found each other, and in doing so had found home. The end.